You know that moment when you realize you've been keeping someone alive while you're dying? When the hands that used to steady during crisis sessions start trembling so badly, you have to hide them under the desk. I'm sitting across from a man who's spent 200 years perfecting rage, watching him finally cry about the daughter he buried in 1852. And all I can think about is the lupus medication I didn't refill this month because my brother needed another round of treatment. The one that keeps my kidneys from shutting down. My vision blurs. Not from tears, from the kidney failure I've been ignoring for 6 weeks because he finally started healing. Because for the first time in 14 therapists, someone was actually reaching him. The cruelest part? I'd do it again. If you've ever saved someone by sacrificing yourself, stay. There are women who understand what it means to be someone's only answer. If you're one of them, if you've ever felt that particular weight, these stories know you. They don't show up everywhere, but they exist here. You just have to let yourself stay. The file on my desk was thin for someone who'd apparently destroyed 14 therapists in 3 years. Nathaniel Cole. I read the name aloud in my empty office at 11 p.m., the only time I could review cases anymore without my assistant asking why I looked so tired. Volatile. Violent ideation. Court mandated after. I stopped. Read it again. After executing 3 of his own employees. The fee was listed at the bottom. Triple my usual rate. Emergency crisis intervention. Minimum 3 sessions a week. I should have closed the file. Should have referred him to someone else. Someone who wasn't rationing their own medication to keep their brother alive. Someone who hadn't been diagnosed with lupus 4 years ago and spent every day since pretending their body wasn't quietly failing. But Kofi's treatment was $47,000 for the next phase. And insurance had decided experimental protocols weren't worth covering, even if they were the only thing keeping my 26-year-old brother from dying. I accepted the case at 11:17 p.m. Sent the email before I could reconsider. His assistant called at 11:19. Dr. Osei? Mr. Cole would like to begin tomorrow. 6 p.m. I'm sending the address now. That's very fast. Mr. Cole doesn't wait well. Something in her voice sounded like a warning. The last therapist lasted 2 sessions. The one before that quit during intake. If you're going to say no, better to do it now than waste his time. I looked at my cabinet where 3 empty pill bottles sat in the back, hidden behind the full ones I kept for show. Looked at the text from Kofi, treatment scheduled for Friday. Thanks for believing in me, sis. I'll be there, I said. The address she sent was in Cherry Creek. Old money neighborhood, the kind where houses hide behind gates and trees, where power doesn't announce itself because it doesn't have to. I arrived at 5:53 p.m. wearing my most professional suit, the navy one that made me look competent, unshakable, like someone who could handle crisis without fracturing. My hands were steady as I rang the bell. They wouldn't start shaking until later, until the lupus progressed far enough that I couldn't hide it anymore. The woman who answered looked exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with lack of sleep. Dr. Osei. I'm Thea. I manage Mr. Cole's affairs. She glanced behind her, lowered her voice. He's going to try to break you. Intimidation. Cruelty. Silence. The last therapist cried in the first 15 minutes. The one before that tried to hospitalize him involuntarily, which she stopped. Just don't take anything personally. And don't expect him to want help. He's trying to prove therapy is pointless, so the court will leave him alone. Why was therapy mandated? He killed 3 people. She said it like she was reporting the weather. They broke a treaty. He lost control. The Vampire Council decided he needed to prove he could manage his anger before they'd let him keep his territory. I stared at her. The Vampire Council. He didn't tell you he was, she stopped. Closed her eyes. Of course he didn't. Look, if this is a deal breaker, I understand. But the money is real. And he needs help, even if he'll spend the first session trying to convince you otherwise. Every logical part of my brain was screaming to leave. Walk away from the supernatural complication, from the violence, from whatever mess this man carried. But I thought about Kofi in that hospital chair, joking with nurses while poison dripped into his veins. Thought about the experimental treatment that was working, actually working, keeping him alive long enough to maybe see 30. Where is he? Thea led me down a hallway lined with art that probably cost more than my medical degree. Opened a door to an office that looked like where power went to think about itself. Leather, dark wood, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Denver's skyline. Nathaniel Cole sat behind the desk like a king holding court he didn't want to attend. He didn't look up when I entered. Just kept reading whatever document held his attention, making me wait. Classic power play. Establishing dominance before words were even exchanged. I sat down in the chair across from him, pulled out my notepad, waited. 3 minutes of silence. Then 5. Then 10. At 12 minutes, he finally looked up, and I understood why 14 therapists had failed. His eyes weren't cruel. They were empty. 200 years of exhaustion wearing a human face, daring me to see past the performance to the nothing underneath. "You're going to quit," he said. Not a question. A statement. They all do. So let's skip the part where you pretend you can help me and get to the part where you admit this was a waste of your time. Is that what you want? I kept my voice level. For me to quit? I want you to stop pretending you understand what it's like to watch everyone you've ever loved turn to dust while you stay exactly the same. He leaned forward. I want you to stop acting like talking about my feelings will fix 200 years of grief. I want. He stopped. Something flickered across his face. Pain, maybe. Or the memory of it. What do you want, Mr. Cole? To be left alone. No, I said quietly. That's what you think you deserve. What do you want? His jaw tightened. This is the part where you psychoanalyze me. Tell me I'm pushing people away because I'm afraid of connection. That I weaponize cruelty to maintain control. I'm asking what you want. Not what you fear. Not what you do to protect yourself. What you actually want. Silence. Then, I want to stop carrying it. Carrying what? All of it. His voice cracked. Actually cracked. 2 centuries of control fracturing in my quiet office. Every death. Every loss. Every single person I've loved and buried and tried to forget because remembering them destroys me. I want to think about my wife without seeing her burn. I want to remember my daughter without hearing her last breath. He stood up. Turned away from me. His hands were shaking. I want one day where the weight of eternity doesn't feel like it's crushing me. I watched him fight for composure. Watched 200 years of accumulated trauma try to fit back inside the container he'd built for it. What if, I said carefully, we worked on making the next 200 years hurt less? He turned, looked at me like I'd said something in a language he'd forgotten he knew. That's not possible. Maybe not, but maybe it's worth trying. Something in his face shifted. Not hope, he was too old for that. But something like curiosity. Like he'd finally met someone who wasn't afraid of his darkness because I was too busy managing my own. 3 sessions a week, I said. Intensive trauma protocol. Minimum 6-month commitment. And Mr. Cole, if you're going to do this, you actually have to try. He studied me for a long moment. Why do you care? Because I'm dying, I didn't say. Because saving you feels easier than saving myself. Because I've built an entire identity around being the one who doesn't break. Because you asked for help, I said instead. Even if you didn't mean to. He sat back down. The king becoming human, just for a moment. Fine. 3 sessions a week. But when you quit, I won't. Everyone does. I'm not everyone. I meant it when I said it. Believed it, even. I didn't know yet that keeping that promise would kill me. The thing about healing someone is that you don't notice yourself breaking until the fractures are too deep to repair. For months. 16 weeks of 3 sessions, sometimes for when Nathaniel spiraled hard enough that Thea would call at 2 a.m. with that particular tremor in her voice that meant he'd locked himself in his study and wouldn't answer the door. I drive across Denver in my pajamas, let myself into that house that smelled like old money and older grief, and sit outside his study talking through the wood until he finally opened it. We developed a rhythm, him and I, Tuesday evenings, Thursday mornings, Saturday afternoons. He'd arrive carrying 2 centuries of rage like a coat he didn't know how to take off, and I'd help him remember it wasn't armor. It was a prison. The first breakthrough came in week 3. We were talking about his wife, Catherine, and he was doing that thing he always did, turning her into a concept instead of a person, abstracting the love until it couldn't touch him anymore. She was remarkable, he said in that distant voice. Intelligent. Beautiful. Everything a man could. What did her laugh sound like?
He stopped.
Stared at me like I'd struck him. I don't. His hands tightened on the armrests. Why does that matter? Because you're talking about her like she's a museum piece. I want to know what she sounded like when she was alive. Silence stretched between us. I watched him fight it, watched 200 years of careful distance try to hold against one simple question. Then his face crumpled. Like bells, he whispered. Her laugh sounded like bells. She'd throw her head back and his voice broke. God, I haven't let myself remember that in a century. He cried for 40 minutes. Not the controlled tears of a man performing grief, but the devastating sobs of someone finally touching a wound they'd been too afraid to acknowledge. When he could breathe again, he looked at me with something raw and exposed in his face. It hurts more now. Remembering her is real. I know, I said quietly, but you're remembering her. That's different than just carrying the weight of losing her. Something shifted in him that day, like he'd finally given himself permission to feel it instead of just surviving it. By week 7, he was telling me about his daughter without his hands shaking. By week 10, he could say Catherine's name without that terrible blankness settling over his face. By week 12, he was calling me between sessions not because he was spiraling but because he wanted to share something, a memory that had surfaced, a realization he'd had, some small evidence that healing wasn't just a fantasy I'd sold him. You're different, he said during our Thursday session in month 3. Than the others. You don't flinch when I talk about the violence. You don't try to fix me, you just, he paused, searching for the word. You make space for it. All of it. I smiled, but my hands were trembling in my lap. I'd learned to hide them under my notepad, to keep them busy with the pen I no longer needed, because I'd memorized every detail of his breaking and remaking. What I didn't tell him, the tremor had started in week 5. Just my left hand at first, barely noticeable. But my body was keeping score in ways I kept trying to ignore. The exhaustion that sleep didn't touch. The joint pain I blamed on too many late nights. The brain fog that made me read the same case notes 3 times before they made sense. I'd stopped taking my medication entirely by week 8.
Had to.
Kofi's treatment was working, actually working, but the experimental protocol wasn't cheap, and insurance kept finding new reasons to deny coverage. Every dollar I spent on myself was a dollar I couldn't spend keeping my brother alive. So I made the choice. Quietly.
Deliberately.
Every morning I looked at those empty pill bottles in the back of my cabinet and chose him over me. Chose Nathaniel's healing over my own survival. Because at least someone was getting better. At least someone was learning to carry their grief without it destroying them. The irony wasn't lost on me. By month 4, Nathaniel was unrecognizable from the man who'd tried to intimidate me into quitting. He smiled sometimes. Not often, but enough that Thea mentioned it with something like wonder in her voice. He'd started painting again. Something he hadn't done since his daughter died in 1852. Messy, emotional work that he'd show me with this vulnerable hope in his eyes, like he was offering me pieces of a self he'd thought was dead. I'm sleeping, he told me during a Saturday session in late September, and the way he said it, like he was confessing a miracle, made my chest ache. 4 hours. 5 sometimes. I haven't slept more than 2 hours at a time in decades. That's remarkable progress. It's because of you. He looked at me directly. You know that, right? Nobody's ever made me feel like the grief was something I could survive instead of something I had to escape. I should have felt proud. Should have felt the satisfaction of good work, of a patient finally breaking through. Instead, I felt my vision blur at the edges. Felt my pulse thrum irregularly in my neck, my kidneys staging their quiet rebellion against being neglected. I'm glad you're healing, I managed. Are you okay? You look. I'm fine. I smiled. Professional.
Practiced.
The smile I'd perfected over years of pretending I was fine when I wasn't. Just tired. Late night with another client. He studied me with those ancient eyes that had learned to read people across 200 years of existence. You take care of everyone else. Who takes care of you? Nobody, I didn't say. Because I've built my entire identity around being the one who doesn't need taking care of. Because asking for help feels like admitting I'm not strong enough to carry it all. I'm fine, I repeated. He didn't look convinced, but he let it go. Let me redirect the conversation back to him. Back to his healing, back to the progress that was costing me everything. That night, I drove home with my hands shaking so badly, I almost pulled over twice. Made it to my apartment, locked the door, and finally let myself acknowledge what I'd been ignoring for 16 weeks. My body was shutting down. Kidneys failing. Lupus progressing unchecked through systems I'd been too busy saving someone else to protect. I had maybe a month. 6 weeks if I was lucky. And I still had 2 sessions scheduled with Nathaniel next week. Still had Kofi's next treatment to fund. Still had a patient who was finally learning that grief didn't have to be a life sentence. So, I did what I'd been doing for 4 months. I pushed it down. Pretended I could survive this. Pretended that saving him wasn't killing me. The cruelest part was how good he looked. How alive. How human. It was working. Everything I was sacrificing, it was actually working. And that made it so much harder to stop. It happened on a Thursday. I remember because Thursdays were always our morning sessions, the ones where sunlight streamed through those floor-to-ceiling windows and made Nathaniel look almost mortal. We'd been talking about forgiveness. Not the kind you give to others, but the kind you finally give yourself for surviving when everyone you loved didn't. He was mid-sentence when the room tilted. Just slightly at first. Like the world had shifted a few degrees off its axis, and my body was the only thing that noticed. I blinked, tried to focus on his face, but his features kept blurring at the edges like a photograph left too long in water. And I think that's what Catherine would have wanted for me too. He stopped. Amara? I tried to answer. Tried to tell him I was fine, just needed a moment, just needed to breathe through whatever this was. But my tongue felt thick in my mouth, and my hands were shaking so violently that my notepad clattered to the floor. Amara. His voice sharpened. What's wrong? The word fractured. Everything fractured. The room spun violently, and I felt my body pitch forward, gravity suddenly remembering I existed. He caught me before I hit the ground. I felt it in pieces. The supernatural speed of him crossing the space between us, the cold of his hands against my shoulders, the way he lowered me to the carpet with a gentleness that didn't match the panic in his voice. Thea. He was shouting. Thea, call 911. No, I tried to say. Tried to push myself up. I'm fine. I just need. But I wasn't fine. My vision was tunneling, darkness creeping in from the edges. My heart was beating wrong. Too fast, too irregular, like it had forgotten the rhythm it had been following for 34 years. Stay with me. Nathaniel's face swam into focus above me. Don't close your eyes. Amara, stay with me. I wanted to tell him this wasn't his fault. That he'd done everything right. That he was healing, and that was worth it. Worth all of this. Worth everything I'd given up to make it happen. But consciousness was slipping through my fingers like water, and the last thing I heard before the darkness took me was him saying my name like a prayer he didn't know how to finish. I woke up to fluorescent lights and the steady beep of machines I recognized from too many hours sitting beside Kofi's hospital bed. For a moment, I thought maybe I was there again, keeping vigil while he slept, counting his breaths like they were the only thing keeping me tethered to hope. Then I felt the 4 in my arm. Felt the oxygen cannula in my nose. Felt the particular heaviness that comes with a body that's finally decided to stop pretending it's okay. You're awake. Nathaniel's voice came from my right. He was sitting in the chair beside my bed, still wearing the same clothes from our session, looking like he hadn't moved in hours. Maybe days. What? My voice came out cracked. What happened? You collapsed.
Kidney failure.
Acute. The doctor said. He stopped.
His jaw tightened.
They said you've been in renal crisis for weeks. Maybe longer. That your lupus has progressed to stage 4. That you've been walking around with organ failure while you... He couldn't finish. Just stared at me with something raw and terrible in his face. While you were saving me. The heart monitor beeped faster. I looked away. Your bag spilled, he said quietly. When you fell. I saw the pill bottles. All of them empty. Expired. Prescriptions from months ago that you never refilled. He leaned forward. Thea called your emergency contact. Your brother. He's on his way, but he told me. His voice broke. He told me about the leukemia. The experimental treatment. How you've been paying for everything. Silence filled the room like a third presence. Why didn't you tell me? I turned back to face him. Saw the devastation in his eyes. Not for himself, but for me. For the choice I'd made and kept making, session after session, until my body had no choice left but to surrender. Because you were healing. The words came out barely above a whisper. For the first time in 200 years, you were actually healing. You were sleeping, painting, remembering your family without it destroying you. How could I? My throat closed. How could I take that away? By taking yourself away instead? His hands were shaking. I'd never seen him shake before. You let yourself die, Amara. For me. For a patient. For someone I cared about. I cut him off. This wasn't just professional, Nathaniel. You know that. Somewhere along the way, your healing became the only thing that made sense. The only good thing I could point to and say, look, this matters. This is worth it. You're worth it.
He was crying now.
Ancient, powerful, supposedly healed, and crying. Your life is worth it. Your survival is worth it.
Not mine.
Not some broken vampire who's spent 2 centuries perfecting grief.
You.
My brother is in remission. I smiled through my own tears. The treatment worked. He's going to live, Nathaniel. He's 26 years old, and he's going to live. And you. The machines beeped their steady rhythm. Outside the window, Denver sprawled beneath an October sky I might not see again. The doctor said my kidneys are shutting down. Irreversible damage. I waited too long. I took a shaky breath. I have weeks, maybe a month. He stood abruptly, paced to the window and back, that supernatural energy crackling around him like lightning looking for ground.
No.
I can fix this. I can turn you, give you immortality, save your life. You don't have to. Nathaniel.
He stopped.
Looked at me with desperate hope bleeding across his face. I've spent 4 months teaching you that living forever doesn't mean you stop hurting. That immortality isn't an escape from grief. It's just more time to carry it. I held his gaze. I'm not going to become the thing I've been helping you survive. I'm not going to trade my mortality for centuries of watching everyone I love turn to dust. So you'd rather die? His voice cracked. Rather leave me, leave your brother, leave everyone who... I'd rather die human. The words landed heavy. Final. I'd rather have this one beautiful, broken, temporary life than an eternity of anything else. He sank back into the chair, put his head in his hands. I can't lose you, he whispered. Not after you taught me how to survive loss. That's not fair. No, I agreed. It's not. We sat in that hospital room while machines measured my failing body and the sun tracked across the sky outside. 2 people who'd learned too late that sometimes saving someone means letting them save you back. And I'd refused the exchange. He came back the next morning with a different kind of desperation in his eyes. I was awake when he arrived, watching dawn paint Denver in shades of gold and pink through my hospital window. The nurse had just finished checking my vitals, blood pressure dropping, kidney function at 19%, time running out in measurements I could finally stop pretending to ignore. Nathaniel stood in the doorway holding coffee he'd probably forgotten he was carrying. He looked like he hadn't slept. Like he'd spent the entire night wrestling with something that kept winning. I need you to reconsider. He crossed the room in 3 strides, set the coffee on the table beside my bed. The turning. I know what you said yesterday, but I need you to actually think about what you're choosing. I have thought about it. No, you've romanticized death. You've made it noble, This idea of dying human, staying mortal, refusing the gift I'm offering. His voice was steady, but his hands betrayed him, shaking as he pulled the chair closer to my bed. But there's nothing noble about leaving. About making your brother bury you when he's barely survived himself. About making me... He stopped, swallowed hard. About making me watch another person I care about die when I have the power to stop it. I reached for his hand, felt how cold it was, how steady mine had become now that my body had stopped fighting. Nathaniel, listen to what you're saying. You're asking me to become immortal so you don't have to grieve me. That's not saving me. That's saving yourself. Is that so wrong? The question came out broken. Is it so wrong to want you to stay? To not want to bury another person who made me feel human?
No.
It's not wrong. It's just not enough. He pulled his hand away, stood and paced to the window, shoulders rigid with the kind of tension that 200 years should have taught him to release. I don't understand you. The words were quiet, defeated. You spent 4 months teaching me that survival matters, that choosing to keep going, even through unbearable grief, is worth it. And now you're just giving up? Choosing death when life is right here. I'm not giving up. I pushed myself more upright, ignoring the way the movement made my vision swim. I'm choosing the life I have left instead of the eternity I don't want. There's a difference. Explain it to me then. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're punishing yourself. Like you think you don't deserve to be saved because you spent your medication money on your brother. The accusation hit harder because it was partly true. I had made myself small, made my survival negotiable, turned my own life into something I could trade for others' healing. But that wasn't the whole truth. Do you remember what you told me in week 6? I asked. When we were talking about Catherine, about whether you'd choose to be human again if you could? He turned from the window, nodded slowly. You said the worst part of immortality wasn't the loneliness. It was the way time stopped meaning anything. The way decades blurred together until you couldn't remember what it felt like to treasure a single moment because you'd have infinite moments. I held his gaze. You said you'd give anything to have loved her with the urgency of knowing it wouldn't last forever. I was talking about loss, about grief, not about. You were talking about what makes life precious. I interrupted gently. The fact that it ends. The fact that we only get so many mornings, so many chances to tell people we love them, so many moments before it's all gone. My voice cracked. I don't want infinite time, Nathaniel. I want this time. However much I have left. I want it to mean something, because it's ending, not despite it. He closed his eyes. That's the philosophy talking. When you're actually facing it, when you're counting down days instead of years, you'll... I'm already counting down days. The machines beeped their agreement. And I'm telling you right now, with absolute clarity, I don't want forever. I want the time I have left to be mine. Fully human. Fully mortal. Fully alive in the way that only works when you know you're dying. Silence stretched between us. I watched him fight it. The logic of my choice against the desperation of his loss. 2 centuries of survival against 4 months of learning that survival isn't always the point. Finally, he sank back into the chair.
Put his head in his hands.
I can't do this again. I can't sit beside another person I love and watch them slip away. Yes, you can. I reached for him, and this time he let me take his hand. Because I taught you how. Remember? Week 8, when you said watching Catherine die had broken something in you that couldn't be fixed. And I told you that wasn't true. That grief hadn't broken you. It had broken you open. Made space for something deeper than just surviving. I don't want to be broken open again. I know.
But you will be.
And you'll survive it. Because that's what you do now. I squeezed his cold hand with my warm, failing one. You don't weaponize the grief anymore. You sit with it. You let it hurt. You paint it and remember it and carry it without letting it crush you. He was crying. Silent tears tracking down his face while he gripped my hand like I was the only thing keeping him anchored. Promise me something, I whispered. Anything. Promise me you'll keep trying. Keep going to therapy. Keep healing. Don't let my death become another reason to stop believing you can survive loss. I had to pause, catch my breath. Promise me you'll live the kind of life that makes this. I gestured weakly at the machines, at my failing body. Worth it. Makes my choice to help you worth something beyond just 4 months of progress. That's not fair.
His voice was wrecked.
You're asking me to honor your memory by continuing to heal while you're refusing to let me save you. I'm asking you to honor everything I taught you. All of it, including the part about how some things end, and ending doesn't mean they weren't worth starting. The door opened. Kofi stood in the hallway looking so young and so alive that my chest physically ached. He'd gained weight since his treatment started working, his face fuller, his eyes clearer, his skin no longer carrying that gray pallor of someone whose body was at war with itself. Sis. He looked between me and Nathaniel, reading the weight in the room. Should I come back?
No.
I managed to smile. Come here. He crossed to my bed, and I reached for his hand too, holding both of them, my brother who I'd saved, and the man I'd saved who wanted to save me back. I need you both to understand something, I said. This isn't a tragedy. What we did, what we built, it matters. Kofi, you're going to live. You're going to have the life we fought for. And Nathaniel, you're going to keep healing. You're going to have centuries of moments that don't destroy you. I looked between them. That's not nothing. That's everything. Nathaniel stood abruptly. I can't, I need. He left before finishing the sentence. Just walked out of that hospital room carrying 200 years of grief that was about to get heavier. Kofi sat in the abandoned chair. Took my hand in both of his. You really told him no? Turned down immortality. Yeah. Why? I looked at my baby brother, 26 years old with his whole life stretching ahead of him now, paid for with my mortality, and tried to find words for the truth. Because some of us aren't meant for forever, I finally said. We're meant for right now. And right now is enough. I had 19 days. The doctors were surprised I lasted that long. My kidneys had essentially stopped functioning by day 3, but my body kept going with the stubborn determination of someone who still had things to say. They moved me to hospice on day 7, a quiet room with windows that opened and furniture that didn't look medical, where dying was treated like a transition instead of a failure. Kofi stayed. Took leave from the job he'd just started, the one he'd been so excited about, the one that represented his future stretching out healthy and possible. He slept in the chair beside my bed, read to me when I was too tired to hold a book, held my hand through the nights when pain made breathing feel like work I wasn't sure I wanted to keep doing. Nathaniel came every day, not as my therapist, not as my patient, just as someone who'd learned how to sit with grief without trying to fix it, someone who'd finally understood that presence was the only gift that mattered when words ran out. On day 12, I woke to find him painting in the corner of my room. Watercolors, soft and delicate, nothing like the violent abstracts he'd shown me in those early sessions. He was painting the view from my window, Denver's skyline at sunset, mountains going purple in the distance. What are you doing? My voice came out scratchy. Speaking had become harder as my body systematically shut down, prioritizing what little energy remained. He looked up, smiled with that gentleness he'd learned over 4 months of breaking and remaking himself. Remembering you. While you're still here to correct me if I get it wrong. Something in my chest cracked. Not my failing heart, but something deeper. The place where I'd been storing all the grief of my own ending. It's beautiful. You're beautiful. He set down his brush. Came to sit beside my bed. I don't mean physically, though you are. I mean the way you've been dying. With grace. With intention. Like you're teaching me one last lesson about how to let go. I'm terrified, I admitted. Every night, I'm terrified this will be the one where I don't wake up. Where I don't get to say goodbye properly. Then say it now. He took my hand. Say whatever you need to say while you still can. I looked at him through tears I no longer had the strength to hide. This man I'd saved and who couldn't save me back, who tried to give me eternity and settled for bearing witness to my ending instead. Thank you for healing. The words came out broken. Thank you for proving that 200 years of grief didn't have to define you. Thank you for letting me matter enough that my death hurts you. That sounds strange, but it means I was real. That these 4 months were real. They were the most real thing I've experienced in 2 centuries. His voice was steady, but his hand was shaking. You gave me back my humanity, Amara. Not by making me human, but by showing me how to carry immortality, like a gift instead of a curse. Kofi stirred in his chair, woke up and immediately reached for my other hand, like he'd been dreaming I was already gone and needed to confirm I was still here. Hey sis. His smile was brave and breaking. You're still bossing people around from your deathbed, I see. Someone has to. I managed a weak laugh. You too would fall apart without me. Probably, Kofi agreed. His thumb traced circles on my palm the way he used to when he was small and scared, and I was the only steady thing. But we'll figure it out. We'll survive you, even though we don't want to. The days blurred after that. Pain management made time elastic, hours stretched into days, days collapsed into moments. But 2 things remained constant. Kofi's hand in my left, Nathaniel's in my right, both of them anchoring me to a life I was slowly releasing. On day 17, I stopped being able to speak. My body had finally decided that breathing was enough work without adding words. But I could still squeeze their hands, could still make eye contact and hope they understood everything I couldn't say. Nathaniel talked to fill the silence. Told me about the painting he'd finish after I was gone, about the therapist he'd already scheduled to continue treatment with, about all the ways he planned to honor what I'd taught him. He talked like he was making promises to my departing soul, etching them into the air so I could carry them wherever I was going.
Kofi read to me.
Poetry mostly, Mary Oliver, because I'd always loved her understanding of mortality's grace. Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? He read, and I wanted to tell him I'd already done it. That this was exactly what I'd planned, to matter enough to someone that my living and dying both meant something. Day 18 was harder. My breathing turned shallow, irregular. The hospice nurse checked on me more frequently, her eyes kind but knowing. She'd seen this before. She knew I was counting down hours now instead of days. That night, both of them stayed. Kofi on one side of my bed, Nathaniel on the other, neither sleeping, just watching me breathe like it was the most important thing in the world. I wanted to tell them not to remember this part. Not to let this image, me failing, fading, barely here, become the thing they carried. But I couldn't speak, and maybe it didn't matter anyway. Maybe they needed to witness the ending to really understand that endings could be gentle, could be surrounded by love, could be chosen in their way. Dawn broke on day 19. Light spilled through the windows, painting everything gold and possible. I felt my body letting go, finally, after fighting so hard to stay. I looked at Nathaniel first, squeezed his hand twice. Our signal. The one that meant, keep your promise.
Keep trying. Keep healing.
He understood. Brought my hand to his lips, kissed it like a benediction. I promise, he whispered. I'll keep trying.
For you.
For Catherine. For everyone I've loved and lost. I promise. Then I turned to Kofi. My baby brother who wasn't a baby anymore, who'd survived his own death sentence and now had to survive mine. I squeezed his hand 3 times. Our childhood code, for I love you. I love you too, he sobbed. God, sis, I love you so much. Thank you for everything. For saving me. For staying long enough to make sure I'd be okay. I wanted to tell him I'd do it again. Every single choice. Every expired medication bottle. Every dollar spent on his life instead of mine. I'd choose him every time. But my breath was running out, and there was one more thing I needed them to understand. I squeezed both their hands at once, looked between them, my brother and the man I'd healed, and hoped they could read in my eyes what I couldn't say. This was worth it. All of it. The sacrifice and the pain and the ending. Because love isn't measured by how long it lasts. It's measured by how fully you gave it while you could. My chest rose once more.
Fell.
Rose again, shallower. Then stopped. And the last thing I felt before the darkness took me was their hands holding mine, refusing to let go even as I slipped away. 2 people I'd saved, learning how to survive being saved by someone who couldn't save herself. The machines went silent. The sun kept rising. And somewhere in Denver, a vampire king learned what it meant to grieve someone who taught him how to grieve. If this awakened something in you, if you recognized yourself in the cost of reaching someone nobody else could, there are others. Women like us, carrying impossible choices. Stories like this exist in the spaces where desire meets sacrifice, where loving someone's healing means learning to grieve your own. But they're easy to lose if you let them slip past. This is where they live. Where women who've survived their own devotion come to remember they weren't alone in it. A century is a long time to keep a promise to someone who isn't there to hear it. But Nathaniel kept it anyway. The first year was the hardest. He told me this later. Not directly, since I was gone, but in the way grief speaks to itself when there's no one left to answer. He continued therapy with Dr. Rashida Okoro, a woman who specialized in immortal trauma and didn't flinch when he talked about the weight of centuries. He went 3 times a week, just like he'd done with me, even when every session felt like voluntarily breaking himself open to prove he could survive it. He painted. God, he painted. Filled an entire gallery with work that looked like grief learning to breathe, abstract pieces that somehow captured what it felt like to lose someone who'd taught you how to survive loss. He sold nothing. Kept every canvas because they were conversations with me, and you don't sell conversations with the dead. On the anniversary of my death, he drove to Crown Hill Cemetery where they'd buried me beside our mother. Brought the watercolor he'd finished, the one of Denver's skyline from my hospice window, and propped it against my headstone. I kept trying, he said to the granite that held my name. Like you asked. It's been hell, but I kept trying. He came back every year after that. Always on October 23rd. Always alone. Always carrying something, a painting, a journal entry, some piece of evidence that he was honoring what I taught him. Year 5, he brought a photograph of himself smiling. Actually smiling. Not the performance he'd perfected over 2 centuries, but something real and unguarded. I forgot I could do this, he told my grave. You probably knew I could before I did. Year 12, he brought news that he'd started mentoring newly turned vampires, teaching them what I'd taught him, that immortality didn't have to mean emotional death, that grief could be carried without weaponizing it. I'm passing it forward, he said. Your work. It doesn't end just because you did. Year 23, he brought Kofi. My brother was 49 by then, graying at the temples but healthy, alive. Everything I'd traded my medications to ensure. They stood together at my grave, and Kofi told stories I couldn't hear but knew by heart. The time I'd stayed up 3 nights straight studying for his high school exams because he'd been too sick with early-stage leukemia to focus, the way I'd always known what he needed before he asked. She saved me twice, Kofi said, his voice carrying the weight of decades. Once by paying for treatment. Once by showing me what it looked like to choose love even when it cost everything. He looked at Nathaniel. She saved you too, didn't she? Every day, Nathaniel answered. For 100 years, she's been saving me. Year 47, Nathaniel brought news that he'd fallen in love. Not the desperate, possessive love of his mortal life, but something gentler. Something that understood endings. Her name is Imani, he told my headstone. She's a sculptor. Mortal. We both know how this ends, but we're doing it anyway because you taught me that endings don't negate the beauty of what came before. He paused. Thank you for that. For teaching me how to love something temporary without needing to make it eternal. Year 61. He brought tears. Imani had died of old age, 83 years old, surrounded by children and grandchildren and art that would outlive her. I sat with her the way you taught me to sit with grief, Nathaniel said. I didn't try to fix it or escape it. I just felt it. And it hurt. God, it hurt, but I survived it. Because you showed me how. Year 78. He brought Kofi's obituary. My brother had lived to 94, a full, rich life paid for with my sacrifice. He never stopped talking about you, Nathaniel said. Never stopped telling people about his sister who'd loved him enough to die for him. He made sure your choice mattered, Amara. Made sure it meant something beyond just his survival. The years continued. 93. 106. 119. Nathaniel kept coming, kept talking, kept proving that a promise made to a dying woman could outlive empires. Year 115, something changed. He arrived at my grave looking lighter. Not happy exactly, but peaceful. Settled in a way that 200 years of existence had never granted him. I've been thinking about what you said, he told my weather headstone. About how mortality makes life precious. About how infinite time robs moments of their urgency. He sat down in the grass, unbothered by the cold November ground. I think I finally understand what you were trying to teach me. It wasn't just about surviving grief. It was about understanding that everything, everyone, is temporary. And that's not a tragedy. It's what makes it beautiful. He reached out and traced my name carved in stone. You've been gone for 115 years. And I've thought about you every single day. Not because I'm stuck in grief, but because remembering you reminds me how to be human, how to value the time I have with people, how to love them knowing I'll lose them, and choosing to love them anyway. The wind picked up, scattering autumn leaves across the cemetery like confetti for the dead. I'm going to keep coming, he said. Every year, for as long as I exist. Not because I can't let you go, but because letting you go doesn't mean forgetting what you taught me. He stood, brushed grass from his jeans. You saved me, Amara. Not by fixing me. By showing me I was worth the work of healing. And I've spent a century trying to become the man you believed I could be. He turned to leave, then paused. Looked back at my grave one more time. Thank you, he said simply. For the 4 months. For the 19 days. For teaching me that some people save you by teaching you how to survive their absence. His voice cracked. I survived it. I'm still surviving it. And that's the greatest gift you could have given me. Proof that I could lose someone I loved and not let it destroy me. He walked away through rows of other graves, other stories, other people learning to live with the weight of their dead. But he'd be back next year. And the year after that. And the century after that. Because some promises aren't made to be kept until they're convenient. They're made to be kept until they become who you are. And Nathaniel Cole, Vampire King, Reformed Rage, living testament to the power of someone believing you could heal, had become a man who kept his promises. Even to ghosts. Especially to ghosts. Especially to the one who'd saved him by refusing to let him save her back. There are others like me in this city. Women who chose someone else's healing over their own survival, who learned too late that saving someone doesn't always mean you get saved back. We don't talk about it in the bright spaces, but we recognize each other in the quiet ones. Denver keeps these stories in its bones. The ones about women who loved something immortal and paid with their mortality. The therapist who taught a vampire king to grieve. The assistant who filtered ancient darkness until it stopped her heart. We're here. In the spaces between human and eternal, where the cost of reaching someone is sometimes everything you are. And if you found something true in this, something that felt like your own heartbreaking, then maybe you understand why these stories matter. Why they need to exist. Why women like us need to know we weren't alone in our impossible choices. This is where these stories live. Where women who survived their own devotion come to remember they weren't the only ones. You just have to stay long enough to find them.